join us today. So I don't think it will be recorded. Sorry. Oh, look. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, transcription has started. Perfect. Anyways, so welcome back after a long season. Today we'll have Martin Hutton presenting on suppression damage repair for us. He's going to give a short presentation, and it will be followed by a Q&A session. We would appreciate you raising your hand if you have questions, because I think there's just too many of us for it to be for Martin to stop and answer all your questions during the presentation. So afterwards, he'll call on you. And if you put something in the chat, I'll try to monitor that. But Martin, because he is presenting, will not be able to monitor the chat himself. I ask that everybody mute themselves. There are too many people on here. We're getting some bad feedback. So if you could please mute yourself, we'd appreciate it. Thanks. So with that, let's get started. Martin, take it away. As you can see, he's a terrestrial ecologist for Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve, and he's going to help us understand suppression repair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. Yeah, I'll talk to you about the suppression damage repair. It's received, relatively little attention in many resource advisor classes, yet it's steadily grown in importance over the years as incidents have been getting bigger, and we're seeing more and more hard suppression impacts. And that is really unlikely to change. We're now seeing incidents that have hundreds of miles of dozer line and many other kinds of impacts. The Dixie Fire had, I think, 2,500 miles of linear containment lines, and that's quite terrifying from many aspects. It's also pretty terrifying that big fire now is pulling way into Oregon, and we'll likely see big fires in Washington state soon. So the one thing I did want to kind of explain is why somebody from Alaska talking to you about suppression damage repair. Well, Southeast Alaska has a short field season, and in September, in what we call Fogtober, I can be available for assignments, and so that's often landed me in the realm of suppression damage repair. So let's kick that off, and let's see how quickly these slides advance here. Okay. So yeah, so when the smoke lifts, are we done? We may be done on small fires without suppression actions. And even with suppression impacts, some agencies may still not repair or repair us fully as we do on federal lands. So on federal incidents, we repair a lot of the damages as best we can using what equipment and resources we have on site. I'm mostly talking today about federal incidents. So let's look at some types of suppression damages. You might find all of them on a single huge fire, or just a few of them on a smaller fire. So dozer lines, of course. They have, multiple flavors. Certainly, we see the one blade wide, we see the 2 blade wide, and it goes right on up to 10 blades wide. So lots of differences in dozer lines. Hand lines, of course, they can vary between simple scratch lines or deep cup trenches. We also see spike camps, of course, an assortment of those. Lots of staging areas, very different kinds of those. We see base camps, large base camps crammed into small places. We see helospots and helibases, and some, hardened ones that are pre-established have very few impacts, but the ones that are constructed may have considerable impacts. And there's a whole host of other things. Think of water sites, dip draft, drop sites, fences, windroad materials, road damages, a spread of invasive species, and many, many other kinds of things. Also think about, wildlife and wilderness impacts. Think about repairing temporary drafting sites that were constructed in the wilderness or elsewhere. Think about all the trash and the equipment that is flown in and needs to get flown out again. So think about the point incidents that happen, the incidents within incidents. There could be hazardous materials that may need to be removed from a crash tender, and that crash tender might need to be removed. All sorts of things we can get involved in as resource advisors. So now that you get a feel of what might be left in the aftermath, let's look at the goal. What is the principal goal? It's that the incident management teams are legally responsible to repair damage caused by fire suppression to an equivalent state prior to suppression activities. It's also common that repairs are to be completed before the departure of the final incident management team, but that actual point is that transition point, that turnback standard, is negotiated with the agency administrator. But for the resource advisor, it's sometimes difficult to figure out what that pre-fire state really was. It's not always easily observable after suppression actions. As a REEF, you might yourself working with the home units to just figure out what that state was. And sometimes doing that investigation just takes too long. It might be easier to just turn that road into something a whole lot better than the condition, pre-fire. And that's okay if that's what the unit wants. It would not be okay if the designated condition of that road was ORV. And so it's your role as REEF and to help figure that out sometimes. There's good reasons often to do something a little different than returning something back to the pre-fire state. And an example might be if gates and fences were destroyed by suppression actions, would we repair those? Well, yes, we would. But if they were from an obsolete fence line, well, the home unit, very likely may not want that repair to take place. And so again, a place where the resource advisor is involved. Another example might be if a dozer line went through an undisturbed forest, and that happens all the time, of course. And let's say that the home unit thinks that it would be smarter not to repair that to a forest standard, but to take it to a fuel break standard. Can we do that? Yes, we can. Should we do that? Well, the answer to that gets a lot trickier. And that's not a simple answer here. And there's not a simple answer here. And we kind of enter the realm of the lead read, and not getting into that now. But these things can get tricky on incidents. Well, a final look here at the what we're really talking about today. So the suppression damage repair is really just only one part of the overall damage repair. So there's also BARE that comes later. There can be BAR, and there can also be administrative restoration actions years later. So we're just talking about this immediate suppression damage repair portion that is being done with the resources that are on scene still from the suppression phase of the incident. Okay, so let's talk about the suppression damage repair process. So you've already said that the basic goal is to resolve that difference between the pre-fire and post-fire states when it comes to the impacts of direct fire suppression actions. And we do not repair the effects of the fire itself as part of the suppression damage repair. And we might address those under BARE or some other phase, but not in this phase. So let's go over the role of the resource advisor in the ARCs in these 5 steps. Documenting repair needs, suppression repair planning, repair implementation, concurrence, and then the final turn back. Okay, so step 1, typically it is the resource advisor that identifies and assesses special resource concerns and special treatment needs, but we're not the only ones. Especially now with all our electronic tools, we frequently see that the incident GISS can constrain, who collects data and who does not, and that can really differ among incidents. Usually, it's the fire operations staff that track, when containment lines goes in, and that's the starting point for us resource advisors. Frequently, though, we see that on large incidents with lots of transition from IMT to IMT, that there's lapses in tracking impacts well interior of the fire. In other words, those lines that didn't hold. And so it's often the resource advisors, the ARCs and FOBs that are the ones that notice and reconcile these kinds of data gaps. So assessing repair needs is usually pretty typical and easy to identify, that a repair is needed. Assessing exactly, what the repair must be may not be easy. So in an example, if we start seeing culverts and drains that were destroyed by dozers, we're getting kind of outside that realm of the suppression damage repair phase into the realm of the BEAR. So it takes a specialist to really assess those kinds of specialized impacts. So just know that there's different phases. Those phases, though, can that BEAR phase, that assessing damages to culverts and overland drains, that can already start during the suppression damage repair by the lead read bringing in a roads engineer, for instance, as a technical specialist. So that specialist then can work among us resource advisors in ARC and begin with that work, but really that work enters or transitions from suppression damage repair into BEAR. So it's not necessarily a clear-cut separation of activities sometimes. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, sometimes in another example, the repair itself might be really straightforward, but the post-repair condition, may still have some interesting aspects that need to be mitigated during suppression damage repair. An example might be, where we're leaving all sorts of access points for OHV, and especially in units that allow OHV use. This can be a big deal to work on the access post-fire. All right, so here's an example of the incident suppression repair map that is created. It's a nice simple one. This one just shows the linear containment lines that were put in. You might have a whole separate one that identifies point repair needs. The colors of the line features itself here are not super important. They kind of vary with the preferences of the incident GIS, but the typical attributes for line features, containment line features like this would be, to identify that a repair is needed but not yet assessed, and that might be a purple, and that a repair is needed and it's ready repair, maybe a red. That repair is in progress, may be shown as yellow. That repair is completed and ready for approval, may be shown as orange. And then repair completed here, is shown in green, and that is pretty typical and standard across incidents. So we can get into this a little bit more later, but we can see differences regarding, how this is handled on incidents. Okay, step 2, the suppression damage repair plan. So this is really the agency administrator's opportunity to guide the repair activities. It often covers, the repair standards common to all, not spatially specific in that sense, and then it may also pull out really specific local and special repair needs. And this plan then is approved by the AA and the IC, and sometimes also the lead resource advisors. The reads and the ARCs may be involved in the development of this plan, but but typically it's just on the periphery. It's mostly a lead read role. So the lead read role then is to communicate, advise, and interpret the suppression repair plan specifications both on and off the line. And that is in recognition that the repair phase on an incident can result in new impacts and new discoveries. The resource advisor and the ARC should be really, really familiar with the ins and outs of that repair plan. So what about those multi-jurisdictional incidents that we're seeing? As incidents gets larger, we often, cover lands with different ownerships. So it's possible that the BLM, the US Forest Service, and the NPS, if they were all affected, that they all might want their own plan. So we can have multiple repair plans on a single incident. When incidents cover also private land, we kind of get at this question, do resource advisors and ARCs work on private land? Well, it kind of depends, but overwhelmingly that is not the case. We work on federal land and we advise on federal land, but not on private land. And sometimes that does go a little different, but my recommendation is to not get involved unless the AA and the lead REIT have specifically directed you to advise on private land. All right, so step 3 in the process is the fun step, implementing repair. How do incident management teams meet objectives? You know, oftentimes I get the question, well, why don't we just give the repair plan to all the operators and the heavy equipment bosses and be done with it? And well, we do that. And we've learned together that the repair process just works the best, the most smoothly when we have actively engaged resource advisors and ARCs working with the repair groups, the operational groups, to quickly and consistently get the repair plan implemented without incurring more resource damage. So that's why that is. Okay, so let's implement the repair plan here, and let's imagine that you're the resource advisor. You just walk down the line with your PPE and you walk up to these excavators that are literally pulling trees out of a major dozer berm and throwing them back on the open line. Let's imagine that we've just crossed an incident ownership boundary and that they're implementing the wrong repair specification. Now what? So the amount of fun that you're going to have on a suppression damage repair assignment kind of depends on 2 things. It depends on your comfort level, working very closely with heavy equipment bosses and operators. And secondly, and most importantly, probably your communication skills. I think this type of direct interaction takes a lot of us REITs out of our comfort zone during suppression damage repair, but it really doesn't have to be so. So because of that, I kind of want to get into a typical day on the line and to kind of illustrate what resource advisors and ARCs do while working on suppression damage repair. So who do you talk to? You know, you of course give recommendations and feedback to the heavy equipment bosses in the first place. And you don't talk directly to the equipment operators, at least not initially. And that is because the equipment operators get their direction from heavy equipment bosses. And so it's important for you as resource advisor to know your place in that kind of communication hierarchy. So if you are giving direction to the operator that is different than what that operator is getting from the heavy equipment bosses, they have to sort out that difference. And that doesn't work very well, and it's frustrating to them, and it makes sense. It's a form of stepping out of our chain of command. And so that sometimes goes wrong on incidents, and sometimes your lead resource advisor quickly hears about that. That's a communication going wrong. So initially, we work with the heavy equipment bosses, and then when the heavy equipment boss is comfortable with you providing direct, detailed direction to the operators, then go for it. But you should continue to check in with the heavy equipment bosses, the task force leaders in division, to keep them in the communication loops always. So one thing to note too is that repair divisions often have a daily after action review on the job site. It can be really efficient for us to attend that. It makes you part of their team. I really like to see that. And you can find that the lead resource advisor has a similar AAR, and that kind of conflicts with attending the suppression damage repair group AAR. And sometimes you can figure out a way to strike a balance with your lead resource advisor. This can be really nice, an easy way to kind of become part of that suppression damage repair team if you can do a little of both. So if you're new and uncomfortable at giving instructions on the line, and consider that you're working with heavy equipment bosses and operators that have a lot of operation experience. They want to know ahead of time, when they need to work on a different specification. You do not really need to give them instruction on how to operate their equipment. They're really good at that. That's not what they need. What we do is we give them information about what's coming, what's coming up for them. When do we need transition to a different specification, or we need to be really on top of when we have a really unusual repair specification. It requires a lot more interaction, and it requires more attention for us to make sure that that goes right the first time when they arrive at that chunk of line where they need to implement that different repair specification. Well, you can also trust that the operators and the heavy equipment bosses will tell you about their equipment and its limitations. You don't have to tell them anything about that. So they will tell you about the comfort limits with certain specification, considering the terrain. You know, operators do differ in terms of their comfort levels, and there are subtle differences, you know, with track type, for instance, that you may not be aware of that may really affect the ability of one particular piece of equipment to work on a chunk of ground versus another one. So keep that in mind. So in the field as resource advisor, I take time to observe operators at work, and I'll check up on their work, particularly when they assume that I won't be watching, or the chunk of ground I won't be checking. And then, you know, within a few days, I'm pretty familiar with what they do, and I know which, you know, when I can make assumptions and when I should not. One thing I definitely want to point out today is that, you know, on big incidents, the morning division breakout at ICP is one of our most key moments on the incident. And there's lots and lots going on during that breakout session. It's often very confusing for us to figure out what exactly is going on, especially because the repair divisions can be very large, larger than suppression divisions. But you need to be there at those breakouts. You be there on time, and you need to figure out what has changed, what is changing. Oftentimes it changes from, you know, hour to hour or moment to moment. Certainly a time, the division breakouts, to be really attentive. And as a lead resource advisor, I kind of look at my reefs and my arcs to see what they're doing during the breakouts, see if they're dialed in. The breakouts are a great place, you know, for a reef to acknowledge good work being done, to let them know that you saw it, you appreciated it, you know, in a concise way. And when you see stuff that needs to be done better, you know, then it's much more effective to work on that with heavy equipment boss or the operators in a private setting. You wouldn't call that out publicly during the breakouts. So when you do these kinds of things, you build relationships, and it's really the important thing, you know, of working on suppression damage repair. It helps when reefs aren't bouncing all over the place like we sometimes do. That way you can stay ahead a day or two. You know which operators are going to transition out, and when you need to be, you know, starting all over again with your assumption making. So anyway, the division breakouts are key. So anyway, there's kind of a suppression damage repair heartbeat to an incident. And it's really fun when you kind of figure out what that heartbeat is, and to be part of that. And when things go well, everybody on the division will be happy to see you on the line, and you kind of become part of that team. You know, it's hard work what they do. They care about it. They like to do it well. They're proud of what they do, and yeah, you're kind of you know, part of that whole machine. It's valuable work. If it doesn't get done right, no one will get to it. All right, so moving onward then. So we often see the basics of suppression repair, you know, in this diagram, you know, distance, diagonal, divert, discharge, dissipate. I'm not going to get into that. It's much easier on the line to learn that. It's really difficult to talk about this. We don't really have time. The hard part is usually that fifth one, dissipate, especially when we're working in the black. Dozers can't really do that well, and that's why excavators are so nice. The thing that most often goes wrong with water barring is that, you know, there's too many of them, or they're put in places where they are not necessary. For instance, when the dozer blades are basically on the side slopes, and the water will naturally drain off the dozer line. But in general, this is something that is easy to learn. If you're not comfortable with it, then just ask your lead read for, you know, an assignment with, or a day with an experienced read, and you can get this under control pretty easy. Okay, some practical considerations of how we fix things. In general, if the damage was created with heavy equipment, we'd fix it with heavy equipment. Excavators with thumbs are essential. We can't always get them at PL5. Dozers with 6-way blades have an important place on large open lines, working alongside with excavators. It's really the responsibility of the division, not the resource advisor, to figure out what the best equipment configuration is. But if you have the experience, you can certainly weigh in. Then think about equipment limits. Dozers can cause a lot more damage in the repair of narrow lines. Difficult for dozers to to pull that material in. Excavators can do that, so dozers have to get behind it. So keep that in mind. It's kind of a watch out situation. Yeah, I mentioned that it's difficult for dozers to daylight and basically diffuse water at the end of the water bars. And whereas dozers can push dozer line, down very steep slopes, some of those oversteepened slopes, very challenging to repair. Again, the picture on the slide, you can see a hand crew working to place a water bar manually in a very steep section where we really couldn't get an excavator back in to do that kind of work. So yeah, and operators can of course refuse that work, just like everybody can on an incident. We can refuse an assignment when we feel it's not safe. So here's just a couple of quick slides to kind of get a feel for equipment configurations. So here's what we call a repair in the green. There's big differences between working in the green versus working in the black. So here we're working in the green, and we're basically just recontouring, and we're doing a full brush pullback and scatter. And 2 excavators, large excavators with thumbs, are perfect for this work. And if it were to be steeper, we'd probably put in a dozer to help with creating water bars, but that was not necessary here. Here's a very different kind of repair in the black. Repair configuration for this chunk of ground was 1 skidder and 2 excavators and 1 6-way dozer. And it's just to help pull that material out of the berm, create water bars, and to move these long whole logs. Skidders are best for that across long distances. Here's a skidder at work, a large 6-wheel 3-axle unit. We typically see the 2 axles, and they might be in use for weeks on the larger California incidents. This is a harvester. It's you don't always see that as one of the most expensive pieces of equipment, but they can be really appropriate when we're working with lots of trees and snags, and so see this more and more. Here's a repair specification where we're basically creating a fuel break. This configuration with this large tracked chipper. It was not very efficient. It was fed by a mini and a medium excavator. And as soon as we got a different incident management team, this actually was replaced with just some large masticators, and we'll see those next. So here's a masticator. They're really fast. This is a disc one. They're very common. These drum ones are not so common. You can see that this one here on the left, lower left, has a thumb on it, so that's really handy. So they can therefore be used to masticate stuff, but also to move logs and rocks, in key positions needed to manage access, for instance. Another section I don't really want to get into too far. We don't really have time, but there's also very special repair needs during suppression damage repairs, where ARCs work very closely with operation personnel to get the site put back together again. It's kind of beyond what I can handle today. Here's another example. And here's invasive species. Again, I'm not going to get into that, but that's one of my specialties, invasive plant management. And this is on a fire in Alaska. Happened to go right through the middle of an invasive plant population, and that dozer now spread that plant, across miles afterwards. There's a special repair on the Thomas Fire where straw bale water bars were placed because we couldn't get equipment there on time before an incoming rainstorm. It's a very unusual event to see that, so very specialized skills needed for this kind of activity. Road repair, yeah, I've mentioned that already. Roads can get really messed up during a fire. Can be a really huge and technical headache for resource advisors. Gets quickly outside the suppression damage repair realm. When we're talking about culverts, drains, and rolling dips, it really goes into the bear realm at that point. But there are some things we can do. It's fine to bring that road back to a much better maintenance level once fire touched it. And sometimes it's possible to bring in, a forest roads crew if they still have one, and basically start them on the repair process even during suppression damage repair. So when you can bring in a local roads engineer, that can be a really great thing to do. So step 4, when the repairs are completed, there's that concurrence phase. And it's really up to the agency administrator and the incident management team to document in the suppression repair plan who is responsible for inspecting, approving repairs. Often, though, it's the resource advisor that gives the final approval for that repair being completed. And there's a good reason for that. So why do you think it is that resource advisors usually get that task? Well, the answer to that is that we work for the agency administrator as resource advisors in ARCS, and that gives the local unit a little bit more control over basically the quality control in the aftermath. But it's not the only way. It doesn't have to be this way. But typically, at least in the West, it's the resource advisors and the ARCS that give that final repair concurrence. It's important for resource advisors, when we are saddled with that task, to make sure that our standards, are up to snuff. They adhere to the repair plan. And I always tell everyone, encourage everyone to put boots and eyes on everything that you're improving, if you're able to do so. And if you're not able to do so, then you might have to come up with a plan on what you look at and what you don't look at. And then step 5. The final step is the turn back. That is potentially, when everything is done, when everything suppression damage repair has been completed, it could be turned back to the agency. It can also happen when repair is still actively ongoing. If, for instance, that home unit, that agency, has the organization necessary to run a type 3 or type 4 repair organization. And if they have that ability, it can work pretty well. And so you might see that the agency takes back and sends the IMT home, when there's still lots and lots of repair that needs to be done. So there's definitely big differences in when that turn back point is really. So some take-home messages. If you don't have a lot of experience with suppression damage repair, don't worry. The fire service is really well set up to manage learning. Be humble and honest about your experience level. Don't misrepresent it. People will see that. Ask your lead resource advisor about a day of job shadowing with an experienced repair lead. It's important for all of us to be on the same sheet of music. And when we're not, it becomes frustrating. So there's often multiple ways to do things right, but if you feel like there's too much difference in terms of what we feel like completed work looks like, we need to take that to the lead resource advisor, and it's his role to make sure to try that we're on the same sheet of music, and there's ways to accomplish that. Just bring a clinometer, wow, to the incident. You can take a slope reading and provide a ballpark number on the number of water bars that are needed, on a given slope. Like I said, there's many ways to do it right, but that ballpark can help and kind of gives you, kind of a sense on what the numbers say. Typically we don't use them much. But it's nice in the beginning. Yeah, if at all possible, avoid go backs, water barring, and other kinds of repair work. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for, kind of that 95% level, and we want to learn and we want to move forward, and so, at all possible, avoid go backs. It's really important for us as resource advisors and archaeologists to be there on time when operational folks need us on the line. And so oftentimes when there are go backs, it really suggests that we haven't been on the ball. And I know we're sometimes spread really thin on the large incidents. And so sometimes this goes wrong, but it's important to do our best to stay ahead of the curve. Yeah, and strategize for efficient and effective repair by communicating effectively and frequently with operational resources on the line. It really is fun when you do that, and think about your communication style. Communication is typically the thing that goes wrong on incidents and everywhere else in our professional careers, of course. Incidents are a great opportunity for us to work on our communication skills. We can focus on building that goodwill, and keep in mind that even though it might seem that that effort may be too much effort, but consider that operational staff that you're working with on an incident, they go from incident to incident to incident, and they will learn they will bring what they have learned to other incidents. So there is a larger payback than is immediately visible in terms of investing time in working with heavy equipment bosses and operators and other operational resources on the fire line. So I think we've been doing a really great job in the past 10 years. Things are getting a lot better, but we can always do even better. Investing our time and energy in them really pays off elsewhere too. So be courteous and be open to feedback yourself. There's a lot to learn. You're part of the team, and do your best to learn about their skill sets too. That will help you. Yeah, just know that incidents aren't all the same. Incident management teams really vary in terms of how they put together, the whole system of repair and how they work together to debrief and basically update that suppression damage repair map, and just be flexible, open, and sometimes you can weigh in and do things better. But just know that when you've learned something on one incident, you may see something pretty different on the next one, and don't be too frustrated by that. Just work on what you can control, and kind of limit your expressing your frustrations with a given process on a given incident. Yeah, and some of us really feel that repair work isn't the most glamorous part of firefighting. I think I'm really concerned with the cumulative impacts of fire suppression on the landscape. Not just in California, but Oregon, Washington. We're seeing areas getting heavily impacted. That repair, I think, is really important to do. We're really going to mess up our landscape if we don't do it. These dozer cuts, in particular, are going to be visible for decades upon decades if they're not repaired. So consider that repair work is valuable, has lasting benefit for the land and for the landowners, and you have to take pride in that work. Yeah, with that, open it up to questions. If there are any, I'm sure there'll be some. Thank you.
Hey, Martin. It looks like there's been a lot of discussion in the chat, but I haven't seen any unanswered questions. So maybe people could raise their hand if they have a question for Martin.
Colby, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Martin. First up, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you. Really, very thorough. I mean it. Thank you. So, question. Talk about not doing the go backs and the excavator with the thumb being pretty well a tool that can't be replicated with any type of dozer. It seems to be so frequent that if you don't have the excavators on hand, and the divisions will ask to, hey, let's just put a dozer line in, let's have the dozer with the 6-way dozer do the water bars, and then once you've got them on the ground, they're like, well, the water bars are there, and so it's kind of an interesting catch-22 situation, I think. Can you speak to that? And my wonder is if maybe at that point the AA that a reef or reed or lead reed is working for needs to understand that it's not the difference between a good water bar and a best one. It's a difference between a functional one and one that's not going to function long term.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any magic to offer really, but yes, it's ultimately the need for proper equipment needs to be communicated up the chain. So through the lead resource advisor to the agency administrator needs to be aware that the not having proper tools like excavators with thumbs will have consequences, and we need to be ready to accept those consequences. And sometimes, there's no way around it. If it's PL5, we're not going to get the excavators to the extent that we need for damage repair. They're going to be needed on the suppression side, and there's nothing much we can do. We just have to do the best we can with the tools that we have available, and that is incident specific, and need to think creatively. Sorry, Colby, that's not a wonderful one. There's not like a magic number I can give you where you can get the excavators with the thumbs.
No, that's a great response.
Given to you.
Sorry, that's a great response, Martin. And any thoughts, like if worst comes to worst, the best thing I've seen is to use dozer with a 6-way blade and a hand crew, so the hand crew can do the dissipation part.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes that hand crew is not going to be available, right? So if there's no type 2 crews, you're typically not going to get a type 1 crew to do it, and so that becomes tough too. And so then it becomes, again, back to you, Colby, on the incident, the incident that you're at. Where do you really need that dissipation to take place? And so maybe it gets skipped or done imperfectly in most places, but then you will need to triage where you're going to really see consequences if it's not done properly. And so you need to and that's, I guess, a part of the whole system of how we work as reeds and working with our resources on the line is to get the work done where it really needs to get done. So yeah, triage is needed. Lynn, do you want to call on people, or I don't think I can.
Sure. Charles Hurd.
Let's see. Am I now? I'm finally unmuted. In the same vein, Martin, is what you were talking about. Sometimes last resort might be to try to arrange with the after the turn back that the local unit can keep money available to do the repairs themselves when equipment is available. Highly undesirable for them because then they won't have the help of an incident management team, but better than nothing.
Yeah, well said. It happens sometimes. Sometimes weather kicks us out of the whole suppression damage repair phase. So basically everything gets abandoned until the spring. We pick it back up then. So for sure that can be an option. If we really don't have the tools available to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, then maybe we can do it later. And so that's again a lead reed agency administrator role to weigh in on that, to make that plan. Up to you, resource advisor and ARCS, to basically communicate upward and identifying, okay, well, this is where it's really a concern, to make sure that those things are known and understood by everyone as we move beyond suppression damage repair, or skip it rather. Yeah, excellent point. So yeah, there's options beyond fixing stuff during suppression damage repair. We can't always do that. Sometimes we document and we hope for the best for the winter, and then we pick it back up in the spring, for sure.
And Martin, I don't see any other hands up. There's a lot of talking about soil pitting and dibbling and stuff in the chat.
Sure.
It looks
Sure.
like
I mean, I could talk about it. We hear that all the time. So typically, just establishing the contour is what we do, and we put as much organic material as we have left. We put it back as best we can. That is the standard. Pitting is popular in certain parts. If that's what the agency administrator wants in the repair plan, he can certainly get that. It is not desired all over the place. I don't necessarily recommend doing it widespread. I think you need to have a special understanding and reason to deliberately to deliberately not restore the contour in full and to provide that pitting. I think we often overdo it on that. So I think restoring the contour is best. But again, that responsibility is up to the agency administrator and the local unit to figure out what they want. And what they want, ideally, we already have that prepared and ready. And so if you think it might be appropriate on your local unit, then you can get that repair specification and that desire all pipelined for us to implement when the incident arrives. So if you think it's appropriate on your unit, fine, you can get that. That's fine, we'll do it.
And then it looks like Colby, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I had one more question for Martin. I appreciate your comments to the triaging on the earlier one. And on a similar note, with increasing occurrences of PL5 with resource shortages, maybe you could share what your thought process is, like when when you're on a large emerging fire and there are 0 fobs on it and 0 available, and you have a limited read staff, on how you're going to deal with your read mission and also trying to see where things are out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question, Colby. I would really struggle to generalize my approach. It really depends on the region. It depends on what resources at risks are. I would hope that all of us that work for local units, we all do, think about that and what needs to get done, where the important parts are, should that big incident arrive on our units, so that we're ready to share data. We're ready to, we have the data ready to share. We have a sharing plan. We know our specifications. And so when it comes time to make decisions on spreading out our available resource advisor and ARC workforce across that affected area, we at least don't have to work on those things that all could have been done in that, in the time before an incident. I think all of us can do better on pre-incident planning. So I think a lot of the future advances are in that realm. And that's going to make triaging easier, because we're going to have better information more rapidly at hand without having to work so hard to get it. So I think that's my big pitch, is that do as much as you can, data-wise, decision-wise, training-wise, train your local cadre to be available, to be a local resource advisor, to train your folks to be a lead read. That's all stuff I think that really is going to come into play. And other than that, Colby, I can give you some examples on how that was done on specific incidents. But I think we need to look inward. You need to answer that question for yourself as it pertains to your unit. the answer is going to be different. I think that triaging always takes place, but we often don't have the information that we need to triage as best as we can. So I think that's what I really see, and that's what several of us see that are serving on incidents a lot, and I think we need to do more in those realms. And I hope that sort of answers your question. I'm really not trying to sidestep it, but triaging is just so specific.
All right, Martin, I don't see anybody else's hand up, and it looks like the chat hasn't turned in. Oh, here we go. Melissa, go ahead.
So Martin, let me see here, put my little hand down. Thank you so much for today's presentation. Wow, total bullseye, knocked it out of the park. I love it. I'm fascinated by all the facets that were brought up during this presentation, and I'm super curious about the after action reviews that were talked about. Is it usually welcome so I'm new to the fire world and I'm interested in many of the different roles, and would I be welcome to listen in, be a fly in the wall at the after action reviews? I mean, are people generally welcome to listen?
Very much so. So what I'm talking about is basically a division, a repair division would basically just meet at their staging area, their local staging area, before they return to ICP. And so the division is using that in part to efficiently hear feedback from everyone, how it went. He's also sometimes using that particular meeting to deal with the accountability of his resources. You as resource advisor are definitely invited to be part of that. They want you there. Oftentimes we can't be there because our lead resource advisor wants us in camp at the same time. And so we often can't. And I think that is a huge missed opportunity. And it's not something that we can easily fix, because our engagement with the lead resource advisor and our peer resource advisors at camp is also critical. But sometimes we can maybe attend a portion of it and then you have to go. Or maybe you can work on the lead read to perhaps not attend sometimes and attend the AAR in the field when you think it's critical. And I think that there's ways to mitigate, having to be in two places at the same time. And I think when you're there, at least some of the time, you just really become part of their team, that operational team, and you're seen as one of them, not some that shows up and says yay or nay. That's not the situation you want to be in. You want to be part of the whole crew, the whole team, and so I think showing up there is a great thing if that can be helped. So.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
And Martin,
Yep.
We had a question come in on the chat about if a dozer line leaves federal lands and goes onto state or private property, do the rehab standards remain the same, or do they revert to something else, like the state's best management practices?
Yeah, so it's really pretty. It's really pretty easy when it comes to private land. We do not work on private land. We're really taking ourselves out on a limb if we start advising on private land. So it's really uncommon for us to do that. And there's really good reasons for that. And you also don't really want to advise on private land. Trust me. Every landowner wants something different in terms of repair. It gets really complicated, so it's much better to let the division or the task force leader deal with it. With state land, it's whatever that affected state wants. And so they might want state BMPs. They may be fine with the higher standards of federal land. It all depends on what they want. So I don't think it's really super standard in that sense. But yeah, great question. But yeah, private land, stay away from it unless you're specifically directed by your agency administrator to do so. And he can have good reasons for wanting to see that resource advisor weigh in. But this, it's an unusual thing. It's an unusual thing. So don't go there. Yeah, lots of great stuff in the chat. I hope that's all captured in the transcription of this event. I can't keep up with it, but yeah, I think there's a few more minutes. I think, but I'd be happy to take a few more questions. Otherwise, just contact me, or it's all good. Hope to see you out on the line if there's no more questions.
Yeah, I don't see any, Martin. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us. I really appreciated this presentation. It was really great, and sharing your knowledge. And you're right, there was a lot of good information coming out of the chats and people answering each other's questions, which is exactly what this is about. So I really appreciate it. And I guess since there's no more questions, I guess we'll just end early, which is great.
Yeah, I just want to say it's fun. Once you get that heartbeat down, working on suppression repair is really fun. So go on an incident, work with your lead resource advisor, and get some exposure to really competent, folks that are out on the line that go from incident to incident. And once you do that, you get in the thick of it, you will see that this is really, it's a fun thing, and it's active. You can get out of the truck, and you don't have to suck smoke all day long. So it's good. Yeah. And yeah, working your communication skills. We all need to do that, right? Yeah, thanks everyone. I appreciate you being there, and hope to see you out on the line.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Really helpful.